formation had left southern Italy before dawn. 60 B-17G Flying Fortresses from the 483rd Bomber Group climbed steadily into thin air, engines droning in unison as they crossed the Adriatic and turned northeast toward Hungary. Their destination was Budapest, a critical node in Germany's wartime logistics network. The Shell oil refinery and the surrounding railway yards were not symbolic targets, they were arteries. Fuel and rail traffic flowing through this city fed German armies fighting desperately on the Eastern Front. By the time the bombers reached cruising altitude, the men aboard Mizpah had settled into the rigid discipline that defined daylight strategic bombing. Each crew member occupied a narrow, clearly defined role. Evald Swanson sat in the left seat of the cockpit, eyes scanning the horizon. Beside him, co-pilot Paul Berndt monitored engine performance. In the nose, Kenneth Dudley prepared the Norden bomb sight, while navigator Joe Henderson calculated headings and drift corrections. Behind them, gunners and radio operators waited at their stations, surrounded by vibrating aluminum, cold oxygen masks, and the constant hum of machinery. As the formation approached Budapest, the air ahead began to darken. German flak batteries ringed the city, concentrated heavily around the rail yards below. More than 200 heavy anti-aircraft guns tracked the incoming bombers, firing timed bursts designed to detonate at altitude. Black explosions blossomed around the formation, close enough to rattle teeth and shake instruments. Shrapnel tore through the sky, shredding metal wherever it found purchase. Mizpah took its first hits in the tail and wings. Warning lights flickered, but the aircraft held formation. Breaking away was not an option. A lone bomber over Hungary was a dead bomber. Discipline mattered more than comfort, more than fear. At the bomb run, the aircraft leveled out. Dudley took control, guiding the bomber toward the release point. Below, the railway yard spread out like a map of steel and smoke. At the precise moment, the bomb bay doors opened. 2 tons of high explosive dropped away, and Mizpah surged upward as the weight vanished. For a fraction of a second, it felt like success. Then an 88mm shell struck the nose of the aircraft. There was no gradual damage, no warning vibration. The explosion was instantaneous. The bombardier's compartment, the navigator's station, the bomb sight, the plexiglass nose, everything forward of the cockpit disappeared in a flash of fire and pressure. Dudley and Henderson were killed instantly. What remained of the aircraft lurched violently as its center of gravity shifted backward. In that moment, the mission was no longer about targets or strategy. It was about staying in the air. The loss of the nose changed everything in a single, violent instant. The forward section of Mizpah was simply gone. No instruments, no control column, no bomb sight, no protection from the air rushing past at nearly 300 miles per hour. Cold flooded the cockpit. At 30,000 feet, the temperature hovered near 40 degrees below zero. Wind screamed through the open cavity where metal and glass had once existed. Blood from the explosion coated what remained of the flight deck. Evald Swanson had no airspeed indicator, no altimeter, no artificial horizon. The instrument panel had been bolted to a structure that no longer existed. The yoke, the physical connection between pilot and aircraft had vanished with it. There was no manual for this, no checklist. No engineer at Boeing had planned for a Flying Fortress to continue flying without a cockpit. Yet, the aircraft was still airborne. Swanson could feel the change in balance as the bomber pitched sharply upward, reacting to the sudden loss of weight in the nose. A stall at this altitude would be fatal. Somehow by instinct, by muscle memory, by sheer refusal to accept the alternative, he forced the nose down. There was nothing to push, nothing to pull, only pressure against the seat and a distant horizon framed by jagged aluminum. At 9:44 a.m., the situation worsened. A second 88mm shell struck engine number 2. The right inboard radial erupted in flame and debris. Oil sprayed across the wing. The propeller windmilled briefly, then seized. Mizpah was now flying on 3 engines, leading speed and altitude over enemy territory. Behind the cockpit, the surviving crew began moving forward. In the bomb bay, they saw the truth immediately. The control cables, steel wire ropes that ran from the cockpit to the rudder, elevators and ailerons were exposed, whipping violently in the slipstream. Normally hidden behind panels and pulleys, they were now bare, vibrating under immense aerodynamic force. Without restraint, the aircraft would become uncontrollable. There was no discussion, no commands. Each man understood what had to be done. They positioned themselves along the cable runs and wrapped their gloved hands around the steel. The cables were rigid with cold. The pressure cut into their palms. When they pulled left, the bomber responded. When they pulled right, it obeyed. Elevators worked the same way raw force replacing mechanical linkage. Communication was nearly impossible. The intercom was damaged. Swanson sat 40 feet forward, unable to see what the crew was doing. The men in the bomb bay could not see the horizon or the wings. Every correction relied on timing, intuition, and trust. It was not flying in any conventional sense. It was survival by coordination, 10 men acting as a single system to keep 65,000 pounds of damaged aluminum from falling out of the sky. And all the while, the formation was pulling away. By 9:46 a.m., Mizpah could no longer keep pace. The rest of the formation pressed southwest toward the Adriatic, maintaining cruising speed they could not afford to reduce. They could not wait. A crippled bomber lagging behind over Hungary was already as good as lost. The distance grew quickly. First a mile, then 2. Swanson could see the other B-17 seconds shrinking into dark silhouettes against the summer sky. Without instruments, he had no precise sense of airspeed or altitude, only the creeping awareness that the aircraft was descending. 30,000 feet became 29, then 28. Slowly, relentlessly, gravity was winning. In the bomb bay, the men pulling the control cables felt another problem emerge. The cold was brutal. Blood circulation in their hands was failing as steel wire bit through gloves and skin. But pain was secondary. The greater danger lay behind them. The tail was moving. Staff Sergeant Charles Tucker, isolated in the rear gunner's position, felt it first. The aircraft was flexing in ways it never should have. The explosion that destroyed the nose had transmitted violent stress through the fuselage. Somewhere along the structure, support members were cracked or weakened. The vertical and horizontal stabilizers were no longer rigid. If the tail section tore free, the aircraft would enter an unrecoverable spin. There would be no time to react, no parachutes, no survivors. Word traveled forward as best it could. Gestures, frantic motions, grim understanding. The crew in the bomb bay saw the structural movement with their own eyes. They knew what it meant. The aircraft was dying. At approximately 9:50 a.m., the black flak burst stopped. The silence was unmistakable.
The squadron
They had
crossed into
crossed
open
out of
sky,
the
a
heaviest
moment of fleeting
defensive
peace above the
zones
brewing conflict
and
below.
into Yugoslavia. For the first time since Budapest, the sky was clear. But survival now depended on time. Fuel status was unknown. The gauges were gone. Navigation was guesswork. The navigator lay dead over Hungary. Swanson knew only one thing: fly southwest and hope it was enough. 3 engines continued to run, but they were operating at high power, burning fuel at an unsustainable rate. The missing nose created enormous drag. Every minute aloft increased the chance of structural failure. Swanson made the hardest decision of the mission. The crew had to bail out. If the aircraft came apart at altitude, no one would live. But if they jumped while it was still marginally controllable, most would survive captured, imprisoned, but alive. The problem was coordination. The intercom was dead. Standard bailout procedures assumed an intact aircraft and clear commands. None of that existed now. Swanson could not leave his seat. The moment he unbuckled, control would vanish. The men in the bomb bay understood this without being told. They began to jump. One by one, crew members clipped on parachutes and exited through the waist gun positions. Each departure made the aircraft harder to control. With fewer hands on the cables, the bomber wallowed, wings dipping unpredictably. Swanson compensated with throttle adjustments alone, the only controls still available to him. The airplane staggered onward, held together by diminishing human effort and borrowed time. And still, the tail flexed. From a strategic standpoint,
this strategic view shows the perilous route from Italy, deep into the heart of the Reich's remaining industry.
The 15th Air Force, operating from bases in Italy, had been tasked with striking deep into Axis control Europe targets, beyond the reach of aircraft flying from England alone. Oil refineries and railway hubs were not chosen for spectacle. They were chosen because modern war runs on fuel and steel. Disrupt either, and the entire army slow, then stall. But strategy rarely reflects what happens inside a single aircraft. What unfolded aboard Mizpah exposed the human cost hidden behind operational objectives. This was not a story of superior firepower or flawless planning. It was a demonstration of how American air doctrine depended, ultimately, on crews enduring conditions far beyond what planners could anticipate. The B-17 was designed with redundancy multiple engines, overlapping defensive guns, structural strength, but no design could account for a bomber continuing flight after losing its entire nose section. The The events over Hungary also illustrated a brutal reality of daylight bombing doctrine. Formation flying provided mutual defense. Fall behind, and protection vanished.
Flak-filled skies surrounding intact formation. Risk multiplied by delay.
Callousness, it was survival mathematics. Every minute spent slowing the formation exposed dozens more crews to flak and fighters. War forced choices where compassion and necessity collided. Globally, missions like this contributed to a gradual strangulation of German logistics. By late 1944, fuel shortages crippled the Luftwaffe. Trains ran less frequently. Armored units were immobilized. The strategic effect was real, but it was paid for by men like Dudley and Henderson.
The War Department announced today that the Allied forces continue their advance.
For Americans at home, these missions were often reduced to communiques and statistics. Tonnage dropped, targets hit, aircraft lost. What rarely made headlines were stories like Mizpah, 10 minutes without a cockpit, hands bleeding as steel cables were pulled by force, and a decision to stay aboard a dying aircraft so others might live. This was not heroism as spectacle, it was responsibility under impossible conditions. And it shaped how a generation of airmen understood war not as glory, but as endurance, sacrifice, and the quiet weight of decisions made at altitude. Evald Swanson hit the trees hard. Branches tore at his flight suit as the parachute collapsed around him and the impact shattered his left leg. He hung suspended above the forest floor, bleeding in pain, unable to move. Minutes later, German soldiers arrived. His war was over, not with an explosion or a victory, but with captivity. Within days, every surviving member of Mizpah's crew had been captured. None escaped. They were sent to a prisoner of war camp in Austria, where time moved slowly and meaning was reduced to routine. Food was scarce, winters were cold, medical care was basic, but they lived. And in war, survival itself is an outcome that demands respect.
Feels like another lifetime, doesn't it?
They waited behind wire while the world burned and shifted
We'll make it back,
beyond
you
their
and I.
reach. They spoke often of July 14th, 1,944 of the moment the nose vanished, of the cables pulled by hand, of Dudley and Henderson, who never had the chance to jump. Those conversations were not celebrations. They were acts of remembrance. Liberation came on April 30, 1945. American tanks rolled past, and captivity ended on a dirt road in a collapsing right. Eventually, the men of Mizpah went home.
We just did our duty. The real heroes, they never
jobs,
made it home.
To lives that rarely mentioned flak-filled skies over Budapest. Swanson himself never called what he did heroic. He said he was lucky. He said the crew was lucky. He said two men were not. History tends to remember wars through maps and dates. But the truth of war lives in moments like these, 10 minutes without a cockpit. 10 minutes where engineering failed and human will took over. Mizpah did not prove that machines are invincible. It proved that people, under pressure, can become more than the sum of their roles. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to reflect on what it was.
I heard the flak is heavy tonight.
Lost,
just stick
but
close
in
to me.
lives carried forward with memory and responsibility. What do you believe was the single most important decision made aboard Mizpah that day? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If you value stories like this, real people, real consequences, real history, consider subscribing. These memories only survive if we choose to remember them. The battle ended in a forest in Yugoslavia. The lesson remains.